I was born albino. My skin came into the world far too pale for that family, my hair almost white from the very first day, and my eyes so light they seemed to unsettle anyone who looked at me. Back then, no one had words to explain it. People only had fear, and fear always finds a way to turn into cruelty. My name was Marissa, and I learned early that a name can mean nothing when no one chooses to recognize you as human. My parents, Selene and Gideon Whitmore, did not beat me or make any grand scene. They did something worse. They treated me like a mistake. I grew up in the same house, but always at the margins, as if my presence were a stain. My mother's gaze held a dry sadness, without comfort. My father's was one of impatience, as though I had chosen to be born that way just to dishonor him. In the village, the whispers began, the grimaces, the way bodies pulled back when I passed. And little by little, my own parents shrank in the face of what others said, as if their shame mattered more than my life. I was abandoned while I was still a child. There was no goodbye, no explanation, no return. I only remember the cold, the light weight of an old cloth over my shoulders, and the world opening in silence, too large for a girl who was far too small. I remember standing still, waiting for someone to come back for me, because children always believe love is just a matter of time. But no one came back. I was left with the street, and the street stayed with me.
As this story unfolds, grant us your favor, stay within our circle, and keep watch, and tell us, where do you think this path will lead?
I grew up on those streets. I grew up with hunger, with dust, with fear. I grew up learning to walk quickly and speak little. I learned to watch hands, hands that gave, hands that stole, hands that shoved. I learned to offer work before asking for compassion, because compassion was rare and work, at least, sometimes became food. I swept doorways, carried buckets, washed pots, pulled weeds from other people's yards in exchange for a thin bowl, a piece of stale bread, a cold leftover. I learned to smile when I needed to, even when my stomach hurt. I learned to be grateful for crumbs, because complaining was expensive. I learned to sleep lightly, because the street punishes those who relax. My body grew used to existing, as if it were always apologizing. My skin burned easily under the sun and peeled, and I was forced to cover my face with whatever cloth I could find, more to escape the stares than to protect myself from the weather. It was not just the hunger. It was the way people looked at me as though I were an omen, bad luck, something that should not be there. I heard many times that I did not look like a real girl. I heard that I looked like a ghost. I heard that I should have died at birth. And on many days, I almost believed it. I survived anyway. Not through beautiful courage, not through heroic faith, but through instinct and stubbornness. Because some part of me refused to accept that I had been born only to be discarded. The change came when I was already young, my face marked not by age, but by survival. I lived the same cycle as always: look for a task, trade effort for food, disappear before someone decided I was a nuisance. It was during that time that a new farmer appeared on the outskirts, someone who had not yet been swallowed by the habit of finding hardness normal. His name was Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he did not find me as one finds a problem, he found me as one notices a life. He was new by the standards of the region, newly arrived, owner of land that still smelled like a beginning. His house needed order, cleanliness, someone to care for what turns a farm into a home. And it took me little time to understand that, behind that work, there was something I had never received: consistency. For the first time, I had a roof. For the first time, I could wash my hands without hurry. For the first time, I slept without calculating the distance to the door, without trembling at every sound. I worked as if my life depended on it, because it did. I cared for the house as if it might cast me out at any moment. I swept, washed, cooked, mended, did whatever was within reach so as not to be a burden. And in the beginning, I tried to keep my distance, because the street had taught me that affection collects interest. I did not trust kindness. I only accepted what was useful. But Nathaniel cared for me in a way I did not know how to interpret. Not with exaggerated gestures, not with pity, not with speeches. With small things repeated, food that appeared on the table every day, a coat left where I would find it without embarrassment, tasks divided calmly, respectful silence when he realized I did not know how to speak without defending myself. He noticed that the sun hurt me more than it hurt others, and without fanfare, he rearranged the work so that I would not remain exposed for so long. He noticed that loud voices frightened me and never raised his own. He noticed that I ate too quickly, like someone afraid of losing, and he always left a little extra, as if telling my body, without words, that there was no urgency. As the weeks passed, I began to change inside, and that was harder than any hunger. Because hunger is a pain you understand. Care, for me, was an unfamiliar pain. I found myself waiting for the sound of his footsteps at the end of the day, not out of fear, but because of a strange sense of relief. I found myself paying attention to the way he worked, the way he treated the animals, the way he treated his own house as something alive. I found myself realizing that, when he was near, my body relaxed without asking permission. I began to feel ashamed of myself in a new way. Not the old shame of existing, but the shame of wanting to be seen. I carried years of rejection clinging to my skin, and part of me repeated that I could not want anything beyond the bare minimum, because I had no value to anyone. Yet his consistency was a kind of argument against that thought. He did not give me crumbs. He gave me normality. And normality, for someone like me, felt like an impossible luxury. The village, of course, did not forget my face. Even after I began to live there, I still felt the stares, comments that did not reach me as sound but arrived as weight. The past does not let go of us easily. I knew that, for many people, I was still the same pale girl from the street, only now inside a house that, in their opinion, did not belong to me. I spent a long time thinking that if I behaved like a shadow, I would be safe. But Nathaniel was the opposite of shadow. He did not hide me. He did not use me as a secret. He treated me as part of the place. And that was, at the same time, the greatest protection and the greatest risk, because that was when I understood something the street had never given me. I was not only surviving. I was living. And when I realized that, I also realized the most intimate danger. I had fallen in love. It was not a lightning strike. It was an accumulation. It was the way my heart responded to his care before I even admitted it. It was the way I caught myself thinking about the future, and for the first time, the future had a shape. It was the way the loneliness inside me began to be filled not by promises, but by presence. I fought that feeling as one fights a fire, because I believed that loving was asking to be abandoned again. I believed that if I allowed myself to desire, the world would demand payment. I believed I had no right to anything beautiful. But there was a truth that grew alongside my fear. I was no longer that child left behind. I had a name. I had hands that built. I had a place that, day after day, stopped feeling like alone and began to feel like home. Nathaniel Hawthorne was the first man who showed me, without theatrics, that my worth did not depend on the appearance the world had chosen to fear. And in being cared for, I discovered something even harder. I knew how to care as well. I knew how to love. I knew how to remain. I, Marissa Whitmore, the girl Selene and Gideon Whitmore abandoned as if she were nothing, slowly learned that what I lacked at the beginning did not have to be what would define me at the end. I grew up on the street, but I was not made by the street. I was made by survival, yes, but also by the ability to pass through hardship without becoming hard. And when love arrived, not as a fairy tale, but as a daily choice, I understood that it was not a reward. It was a beginning again. And, for the first time in my life, I stopped existing as someone who only expects to lose. I began to exist as someone who can stay,